Parshas Chayei Sara. There's a story. You'll open on page 106. There is, in the book of Yehoshua, we have a story there as they are conquering the land. We have Kalev ben Yefuneh, you remember him, one of the two good spies, approaching his old colleague, Yehoshua, and he turns to Yehoshua with a request. He said to him, listen, at age 40, Moshe Rabbeinu sent me with you, and we returned as the nation was getting the negative reports of the land. Moshe tells the nation that, listen, we're going to be spending a long time here in the wilderness, but you, Kalev, the land, Asher Darcha Raglecha Ba, the land, you, Kalev, which you visited, Lecha Tiyeh Lenachala, it's going to be an inheritance to you, Ulevanecha, and for your children, Adolam, for eternity. So Kalev, you came back with a good report. You had the courage to stand up against the words, the actions, the attitude that surrounded you. So therefore you will get this land, Ki mileta acharei Hashem, Elokai. So now Kalev finishes quoting Moshe, and he tells Yoshua, Ve'ata hine hecheya Hashem oti. God gave me life, ka'asher diber, as he spoke, ze 45 shana. Those events occurred when I was a young man, when I was 40 years old. Now it's 45 years later, and Anochi hayom, my age today is ben 5 u'shmanim shana. So he's an 85-year-old making a request. And he throws in, and it's not trivial if he mentions it, and if the prophet quotes it, Odeni hayom chazak. You should know that today, at age 85, I am as strong, ka'asher biyom sheloach oti Moshe. At age 40, I was able to make the journey. I was a strong fellow. Nothing has changed at age 85. Kekochi az ukekochi ata lamilchama. You want to find a good chayal? Kalev, the 85-year-old, he can do it. Latzet velavo ve'ata, and now tnali et har hazeh. Give me the mountain, give me the region. Asher diber Hashem vayom hahu. So Yehoshua blesses him, Vaiten et Chevron leKalev ben Yefuneh lenachala. It became the inheritance for Kalev, and it remained ad hayom hazeh ya'an, due to the fact asher mileh acharei Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Chevron, we are told, is also called Kiryat Arba. It was given indeed to Kalev. Beautiful story, he remembers, but what is the significance of him mentioning the fact that at age 85, I'm going to check my muscles, right? I'm in good shape. Why are we being told this piece of information? Okay. So let's start this week's portion, and then perhaps we could discover a little bit of the answer of what's taking place. So we know this story. The Torah shares with us the passing of Sarah right after the events of the Akedat Yitzchak. There's a relationship between the two according to rabbinic tradition. She gets the news, it has an impact on her. And she lives 127 years. Verse 2 on page 106, Vatamat Sarah B'Kiryat Arba hi Chevron be'eretz Knan. She dies in Chevron. Vayavo Avraham lispod le Sarah ve'livkota. And commentators note that if you look at the order of things, that first we are told that he eulogizes. And only afterwards, we are told that he starts crying, that perhaps there's a message there as well, that he doesn't want to just immediately start crying, that perhaps would indicate that he regrets the events that led to her passing, which would be the Akedah. He does not regret it. He cries, but he blends it into the eulogy. And he begins the process of negotiations to purchase the land. He's linked eventually to a fellow by the name of Ephron in verse 8. And he asks specifically in verse 8 for the Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Ma'arat HaMachpelah, nothing more. And he mentions the fact that this cave, this double cave, they do note that Moshe Dayan sent in archaeologists to the Ma'arat HaMachpelah after the 6-Day War, and there was actually a cave below the ground level. In other words, it does seem to appear as a double-layered area. It's kaful, and that's one of the reasons mentioned why it is called Ma'arat HaMachpelah. Fine, other explanations are given as well by the rabbis, but it was identified as the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, and the location was at the end of his field. Now, Ephron responds in verse 11 on page 108, listen, I'm giving you the field, and I'm giving you the cave. No need for money, we are close people, this was a public event. Ephron wants to make it very clear that he has a very strong relationship with the most respected individual in the region. That is what happened at the time. Throughout his many years of kindness, he did have an impact. So for Ephron, this is an opportunity to show his closeness, that he is willing to give him not just the cave, but the field as well. Now, we do know the negotiations that Avraham says, listen, I feel I must pay for it. And he turns to him and he says, the money is ready to be handed. Verse 15, Ephron responds, Adoni Shma'eni, my master, listen carefully to what I'm saying. That our relationship is so good that I am willing to just give it to you. Right? And a land that cost 400 shekel between such close colleagues like me and you is something that's very easy for me to give, right? And I always compare it to the person you send, you ask them to purchase some things for you in the supermarket. They come back and they say, no, I will not take money. Well, what is $16.38 for such close friends, right? So when you are given the precise amount, you know very well what the real desire is there. And we know that Ephron is, according to our rabbinic tradition, a very greedy fellow because he tags on unnecessary property to the cave. Abraham asks for a cave. He says, no, it must go with the field. Take this gift with the field. And then when he says it's valuable with the field, it happens to be a cave and a field, goes for 400. That's what Ephron is all about. Abraham hands it to him. It's interesting to note that when the transfer of the lot actually occurs, Ephron loses a letter in his name. Ephron loses a letter in his name. And in verse 16, Vayishma Avraham el Ephron, and the first time he is mentioned as good old Ephron with his vav, and then he becomes Vayishkol Avraham le Ephron. He weighs the coins to Ephron. Ephron is watching there, standing there, as he is weighing every single coin. The fellow who was willing to give it for free is watching to be sure that he gets the precise amount. He loses his vav, and the commentators note that there's a concept of a ra'ain in Judaism, a person who has an evil eye, who is not interested in others having, but needs for himself, right? Wants that financial security, doesn't trust anything but the almighty greenback or whatever currency he does trust. Such a person is a ra'ain, the numerical value of the guy that wants it all Ra'ain is a 400. The 400 symbolizes that idea, because if you look at the numerical values of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the max is the top. So the fellow who wants the max is a 400. Numbers are very significant in Judaism. Throughout the Talmud, for example, whenever the rabbis want to say something that's an exaggeration.
It's also 400 shekel.
Oh, so it's also 400 shekel, correct. And that's why it's also Ephron without a Vav, which the numerical value would be 400. Numbers, a 300 in Talmud is always an exaggeration. Whenever the rabbis want to say that the guy drank 300 barrels, for example, it's an exaggeration. 300 is an exaggeration. 400 is always the number that symbolizes the guy that wants it all. Not satisfied with what there is, he feels, I indeed need it all. Okay? So there's a transfer here, and what's interesting is that this location, this area, is elevated. It becomes, and the Torah uses the word vayakam, it becomes elevated, it becomes the domain of Avraham Avinu, and this is Hebron for eternity, and therefore, if you have a privilege this weekend, and you make your way to Hebron, there are thousands, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's a very, very popular event of people going to Hebron. I haven't not been there for Parshas Chayei Sara, but I'm sure people around here do know people. You've been there. You've been there.
And for Chayei Sara, and there are so many people you can't. The field of Ephron is like you can't get even into the Machpelah. You have to sort of wait in line, and the field is full of people davening.
That's interesting. So Hebron has a very special place in our tradition, but what we're going to try to do is try to understand what the essence of Hebron is about. And by understanding the essence of Hebron, we will understand as well why it is with this place that we knock off the attitude of the Ephron. In other words, Hebron becomes the force against the Ephron. It's removed from Ephron and his attitude and his way of thinking, which must be purged, and it becomes a Hebron. And then we're perhaps going to have an understanding as well regarding Kalev's statement. The statement that I'm 85 years old and I am in perfect shape. There is a vort that they say in the name of one of the Gerer Rebbes. And it works as follows. Avraham Avinu is told in the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha Kum Vehi Talech Ba'aretz Le'orka U'Lerachba. Make your way throughout the land, travel the land. So you would imagine that the Torah will start describing his journeys, how Avraham Avinu is traveling from place to place to place to place. What's the first thing we are told right after he is told, begin your travels? What? He settles. Where does he settle? Hebron. So this seems to be quite odd. The text should be telling us that he is traveling from place to place. So the Ger Rebbe notes that Hebron is the way you acquire all of Israel. Hebron, by settling and by acquiring and making Hebron yours, right? All of Eretz Yisrael really becomes yours. And therefore the Torah tells us, go ahead, make your way around the land. So he understands that there's one area that he has a chibur, a connection to the land, and by settling there, there's no question. If the statement of the Almighty was that he should be walking, he indeed did walk. But the chibur element, the connection to the land, is occurring with Hebron. Hebron always had a special place in our tradition. Now, we all know of the historical Kalev placement there. We know that during the Second Temple period, there were many, many Jews there. And then there, in the year 1540, there was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Malkiel Ashkenazi. Rabbi Malkiel Ashkenazi, who probably originated his family in Spain, settles there in 1540, and he builds a shul. And the shul was named the Bet Knesset Al Shem Avraham Avinu, which is a popular tourist site. They had a legend there. Every place has its legend. And what's the legend of the Avraham Avinu? That when our son Aaron went with a friend to Israel at age 12 or 13, they had a bar mitzvah there, and they sat down the children, and the story they shared with them was that this shul in the 16th century, they only had 9 people for a minyan, right? I'll let you start with that. And then a 10th person walked in and he vanished. They never saw him again. And they figured out that he is
Avram
Avinu, actually. That's right. If it would have been in the Carmel, they would have now named it Eliyahu Navi. But they named it the Bet Knesset Al Shem Avraham Avinu. Okay. The community in Hebron from 1540 grows. They have a nice community, never the strongest. And then in 1924, there was a movement by a specific yeshiva in a suburb of Kovna. So you know Kovna, Lithuania. There's a suburb that the Jews called Slobodka. And in Slobodka, they had a well-respected yeshiva, the Knesset Yisrael Yeshiva. And they decided that it's about time that they begin the process of transferring the yeshiva to Eretz Yisrael. And it was not something that would be done overnight, but they sent the first 6 Bachrim in 1924 to Eretz Yisrael, and they are looking for a city to establish their yeshiva. In Yerushalayim, they did not sense that they are completely welcome. In Yerushalayim, they did not feel completely welcome, and the reason was that the Slobodka yeshiva had a philosophy that was traced back to Rabbi Yisrael from Salanter, that you're supposed to dress modern, that you are going to be interacting with society and you should wear modern clothes, modern suits, and set aside the old levush that you would find in the 17th century and 18th century. So that didn't work well, coming in with white suits and white hats to the old yeshuv in 1924 didn't work well. And Tel Aviv, they didn't feel comfortable yet at the time settling there. So, and another reason given why they avoided with Yerushalayim, and this is testimony of Rabbi Yecheskel Sarna, Rabbi Sarna, who headed the yeshiva in Hebron. He arrived there in 24. He headed the yeshiva until 1968. So that's a very long period of time, a very wise and very well-respected individual. And Rabbi Sarna said that they didn't want to come to Yerushalayim due to the machloket, due to the big fight that was taking place at the time between Hagaon Harav Kook and Kanaei Yerushalayim and the Zealots of Jerusalem. So there was a lot of tension there in the early 1920s in the line of Israel. So what's the second best city? They're not going to Tzfat. They're not mystical. They're not driven by the mystical elements of Tzfat. They choose the city of Hebron. They settled there. My grandfather was among the first 6 who settled there in Hebron, and it was a well-respected institution that attracted boys over the next few years, not just from Europe, but even from the United States. And I've mentioned it, that there was a young man in Hebron, a young man from Memphis, Tennessee. From Memphis, Tennessee, in the 1920s, studying in Hebron. This man Scheinsberg, I forgot the name, but I do know that his niece is a woman that I know very well, Mrs. Rubel there in Memphis, who actually the granddaughter of the niece is marrying Frank Mayer's nephew. When was the wedding? Yesterday?
16. No, it's the 16th.
16. Okay, so now there's a connection. There's always a connection. Unfortunately, this young Bacher who went to study in Hebron from Memphis, Tennessee, was massacred in 1929, which were the awful events that occurred there. I think 67 people were killed in Hebron itself. And that was the end of the community. There wasn't a short attempt to return after that in the early 1930s, but by 1936, they realized that it will be impossible. That was the end. The Knesset Israel, the yeshiva that was present there, was identified after the 1967 war. And it was under Israeli control. The yeshiva in Hebron was under Israel control until 1998, when Benjamin Netanyahu, of all people, returned it to Yasser Arafat. So that's the history of the region there. So that is Hebron. Hebron is always considered extremely significant for us. So what is the idea? What does really Chevron, what does it represent to, again, give us clarity regarding our issues? Now, there is a midrash, a book of midrashim called Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar. Pirkei, the chapters of Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar was a great rabbi in the beginning of the 2nd century, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. So there is a book that is called the chapters, the teaching, the midrashim of Rabbi Elazar. It is obviously much later because this is a book that relates a lot to the Islamic impact on Judaism in the 7th and 8th century. So by reading this midrash, there are fascinating midrashim, very significant ones, obviously very old ones, but they are actually recorded in the late 7th century, maybe the early 8th century. We know it from the fact that it talks about Fatima, and it talks about Muhammad a little bit, and it talks about the fact that the Muslims, the Bnei Ishmael, taking Har Habayit. In other words, a midrash that's talking about the children of Ishmael who actually conquer Har Habayit, and obviously that is not occurring until the 7th century. Fine. But the midrashim, nevertheless, are ones that the stories shared are very old traditions that exist, which were taught by great rabbis and had significant messages. And it works as follows. The midrash asks, when did Avraham Avinu develop his desire to be buried there? In other words, he finds Sarah is no longer alive. He immediately approaches Ephron to begin the process of securing a spot in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. When did he sense it? How did he know that it's a significant location? What did he know about it? How did he get the information? That's what the Midrash asks. So the Midrash tells us the following story, that during the events in the beginning of last week's portion, when he is preparing the 3 calves, was it? For the guests. So we read this story as they came, he put the food in the microwave. It's because we read it fast, right? So he put the food in the microwave, and immediately it comes out, and he serves them. Obviously, when guests would come in those days, right, this is a langa maisa. It takes time to process the rabbis tell us that he gave them 3 tongues with the mustard, indicating that, I don't know if there is a minhag. Do people have a minhag? Probably in Israel they do. It's in Parshas Chayei Sara to eat tongue and mustard. But there are midrashim that he prepares the food for them, and it takes a long time. He prepares bread for them, and even though it says vayimaher, obviously it takes time to get from the calves, from the cattle, and he takes the tender one, he hands it to them, he prepares them.
This is Pesach time too.
So it's Pesach according to a rabbinic tradition, correct.
So therefore he was a Sephardi, because he had mustard.
He had mustard. Interesting. Okay. So
And it doesn't take as long because the bread didn't have to rise.
Bread didn't have to rise, it was faster. Okay, so you're cut out a few minutes of it. The Midrash tells us that as he is going to prepare this calf, the calf gets away. And it starts running. And he chases it. He chases the calf. And the young calf makes its way into a cave. He follows the calf into the cave. And who does he find in the cave? The burial spot of Adam and Chava. And he says to himself, this is where I want to land up. That's what he declares. He comes back. Fine. This is a midrash. Now, the midrash feels, the teacher of the midrash feels that there is a need to link. There is a need to link the significance of that location for Avraham and his act of kindness. So, what is it about the two? How do the two of them come together? Okay. So we have to remember that Judaism, our Judaism, is not a religion that believes that we are significant and the rest of the world are infidels. Right? We talk about it over and over again. Judaism is a religion that says, yes, that we have a unique role, but the unique role, which makes us unique due to the fact that we have a very specific mission, but it is for the sake of humanity. Right? You take the Aleinu L'Shabeach prayer. Aleinu L'Shabeach L'Adon HaKol. It's very Jewish, the first half. right? Shelo asanu kigoer, so that we Jews were not made like the nations of the world. And then if you add that parentheses, which ideally you should, shehem mishtachvim, nations of the world, they worship all kind of foreign forces. We, on the other hand, anachnu, we Jews, korim mishtachvim odim lifnei, you know who we worship? Melech malchei amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and He created the world. Fine. So the first half of Aleinu talks about our unique role, how special we are, what we are here to achieve. The second part of the Aleinu is that a day will come, lahavir giluli min haaretz, that all idolatry should come to an end. Humanity will recognize lecha ticha kol berach. Everyone will recognize you, God. And that's what the Aleinu prayer is extremely significant, because it tells us the Jewish outlook of religion and the world. That yes, we have a unique role, but we think about the human race. Okay, and that is Avraham Avinu. And therefore, Avraham Avinu is doing acts of kindness to reach out to humanity. He is not forming a religion where he is only taking care of himself. And we have to remember, he is not the first person that recognizes a higher being. According to our tradition, you had people like Shem and Aver. You had a lot of righteous people like Noah who recognize a higher being. But he is the first one that is walking around with this responsibility. I have to reach out, I have to teach, I have to inspire the world around me. Okay? So therefore, Chevron, right, when you look at the Kvurat HaAvot, we don't just say it's the burial cave for our patriarchs, but rather we link it to Adam HaRishon, the father of humanity. And we say that that which binds us to the land is not just for us, but it's for the world. We believe that the world pays attention to what is happening in Eretz Israel, and the day will come that we will utilize that natural tendency of humanity to inspire the world, because we think about the world. And that's why Avraham Avinu desires that location the moment that the Torah is describing to us his concern for reaching out. The Torah says, you know what, as a result of his concern for reaching out, he is going to lay together in the Marat HaMachpelah with the Father of humanity, because all he is about is reaching out towards humanity. That's what is about. That's what Chevron is about. Okay, but what we have to remember is that Chevron is the ability to recharge ourselves as well. Right? When you think that things are in a decline, and you want to go ahead and get a beginning, you want to start again. You want to have that ability to, re-inspire yourself. That's what Chevron is about. In other words, you think, for example, the events here. You have Avraham Avinu at the most devastating moment of his life, the loss of the only person that really understood who he is, right? The person that he travels his whole journey with, and she passes away. He finds the courage to go through difficult negotiations in Chevron. And it seems to be that in Judaism, the only way we could overcome challenges is with a Chevron, a chibur, a connection to the higher being, which the city symbolizes. Chevron is the city that David HaMelech, right, has to begin the process of becoming the king of Israel. An overwhelming experience, right, of dealing with a father-in-law who has no interest in him. He has to find the courage from within to overcome, right, to start again. That comes in his journey. He begins. He was a king for the first 7 years. It's Chevron. You can't reach a Jerusalem where you reach out to the world if you don't have first the Chevron, if you don't have that connection to the higher being that gives you the strength, the courage to go ahead and overcome the challenge. That's what Chevron is about. So when you want to seek that energy, to deal with the challenge, and you have to have a chutzpah, by the way, at times. Challenge often is there to tell you you can't do it, right? That's what challenge is all about. When there is everything around you is telling you, you will not succeed. And you have to have the chutzpah to say, I can do it nevertheless. I could do it. So the place to find that energy to do it is the Chevron. And if you think of an individual that has chutzpah, good chutzpah, and he inspires a nation to deal with the greatest challenge, you think of Kalev ben Yefuneh. Kaleb ben Yefuneh. It's interesting that in our tradition, when they talk about creatures, the animal, the dog, is defined as one that has chutzpah of all creatures. Comes straight into your face, right? The owner says, no, don't worry. It's a nice, it's a cute puppy. It doesn't do anything. It's about that size, and it's on you already. And the owner says, no, it's okay. It's, it's a friendly, that won't hurt you. Right? So dogs symbolize this chutzpah. Chutzpah that is used in the proper way is the ability when you have everyone around you saying one thing and you say, nope, you're wrong. And that's Kaleb. Everyone around him, the spies, and he's going through a long journey. When they are kvetching and complaining about this land, about motion, about their future, claiming that we are finished. There is no hope in the future. We are finished. You could forget about any solution in the future to the problem of the Jews in the wilderness. You have Kaleb there who says that's not the case. Alon Aleh will achieve and will succeed anyway. The optimism of Kaleb, the courage of Kaleb, and obviously because he is connected to something much greater. He is connected to the higher being. He has the chibur that gives him that ability to overcome the challenge. And it's I heard a conversation between two Israelis over the past few days when one of them was saying that this is in Toronto, right? There are a lot of Israelis in Toronto, I don't know if you're aware of it. So go to the promenade if you don't believe me. So there are a lot of Israelis here. For me, there is nothing as sad as a secular Israeli outside of Israel. I see that as a tragedy. Why do I see that as a tragedy? If you are observant, right, and you are a person that knows the value of Israel and you plan to get there one day, so that's you feel a connection. The secular Israeli quite often has the Israeli nature of things. In other words, the attitude and likes the hummus, and can tell you the history of the movies in Israel, and they love the culture. But due to the fact that they don't have the real connection to the land, as long as they are there, you're there. When you are on the land of Israel, you have a schut. We find this in our tradition right and left. That even Esav, who was not righteous in our tradition, but Yaakov Avinu feared that the merit of him being present in Eretz Yisrael will protect him. True. Outside of Israel, if you don't have a connection to tradition and you're not physically in the land, it's it's a sad event. That's my personal outlook on how things are, and I see it. So I hear a conversation between a secular Israeli and a person who is a shliach, a religious Zionist Israeli. The secular one was saying that they are devastated with the situation. It's over. In other words, there's going to be a big war. You know that everyone, in other words, it seems like the end is near or here. That's the attitude they have. And that's, a natural way of thinking of things. If you just read the news about Israel and you don't live there to feel the good vibes that exist, you're doomed. You are doomed. And it's natural to think so. The religious fellow was responding in a far more optimistic tone. We've been there, we'll be there, we have, our connection is much deeper. That was the conversation. And that is, of course, the conversation that Kaleb is having with the spies. And I mentioned Kaleb because remember very well, Yehoshua, as they are traveling back, right? It's the worst thing if you think about it. A long journey, right? We're talking about, weeks, with people that don't get along. I mean, just think about it. Baruch Hashem, we had a shul mission, everyone gets along. But you could close your eyes and think about what would happen if. So that's what's happening there. They have a mission to Israel where Yehoshua it is clear in my mind that he is not on talking terms with the other spies on the way back. Their agenda against Moshe and against the land and against God is clear. Yehoshua is not the type to conceal his commitment to Moshe Rabbeinu. They're finito. It was the silent treatment for Yehoshua. And maybe that trained him for leadership one day, right? Being alone on the top of Klal Yisrael. Kaleb is different, right? Kaleb is still schmoozing with them. Kaleb, they think, is a buddy-buddy. They think, but he had the ability to conceal his true feelings. And then eventually in the wilderness, when they give him the option and the opportunity to address the crowd, probably every one of the spies got up there, kvetched about the land, each one shared a different negative angle of Israel, and it's very, very easy, right, to talk about the pushing, and this one talked about the Sharut, and each one talked about something negative. And then Kalev gets up and he says, worry not, Alon Ale, worry not. We have a connection to something greater. Ignore the media, ignore the left, ignore all that. Their optimism is what we should have. We have a chibur to something great. That's the Kalev ben Yefuneh. And he, of course, belongs in Hebron. He belongs in Hebron. And that's what he's saying. And therefore the text tells us in the book of Yoshua that he retained his youth. Right? The person who is full of enthusiasm, full of life, right? And he can recharge his batteries on a daily basis, believing that, you know what? There's a future. People are always concerned about the fact that 1948, there was enthusiasm for a Jewish home, so the youth is willing to fight. 2014, do we still have that enthusiasm of the past? And you see it among the secular in Israel that they lost hope, many of them. In other words, enough is enough. We've been fighting for 7 decades. You have people saying, and I've heard it, I fought, my children fought, I don't want I don't want my grandchildren. And if you're not willing to fight, and your enemy is, boy, are they willing to fight, you're not in a good situation. If you have the Kalev ben Yefuneh approach, if you have the approach that, yes, the challenges exist, there's no question about that, but we have the power from within. At age 85, you declare, I'm ready for war. What do you mean? If that's what's necessary today, and that's what my Chibur to HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from me today, I have absolutely no problem doing it. That was the Kalev ben Yefuneh. And he asks, and he gets, and they hand him Hebron. You saw it in the past, and you see it today. It's an attitude of optimism. Now, often in life, when we have this natural tendency of feeling, how feeble we are and how insecure we are, and we stand on no ground, we seek security. When you say to someone, I'm looking for security, what is the first thing that comes to mind? I want security in my old age, right? I want security that I could do whatever I want. Everyone thinks of finances, right? What health is out of our control, and that's a reminder that Hashem sends us, that it's from somewhere. But people feel they are in control with money, right? Money is, in God we trust. In the United States, they put it on the bill because they trust the God of the bill. Of the bill. There's no question about that. So money symbolizes that. And often there's a lack of faith. An attitude of money will indicate what level of faith we do or don't have. That's how it works. And Ephron symbolizes the man of, he's Mr. 400. He's Mr. 400 because he wants the max, because he is looking for that security in life, and that's what he wants. He wants to walk away with the highest price possible for Hebron. Vayakam, it becomes elevated. Avraham Avinu takes that land, and he takes the attitude, and he declares, and he teaches us, and he teaches all generations that the security that we have in life is not the finances, it's not the 400, but it's the Hebron, it is the Chibur. And it is the area that you grab it, and you grab the land of Israel. And it's an attitude of optimism. And I think it's an important message, as unfortunately, Israel is again and again under threat and under attack. And it is a crazy form of attack because there's no way, there's no simple solution, or perhaps there's no real solution. The natural tendency that some have is that they let the pessimism and they start believing that there's no hope. And what's important is, of course, to see the optimism that exists there and to learn the message of Hebron, that the message of Hebron is that, look at Kalev ben Yefuneh, look what Hebron is about. Look at the fact that if we are believers in the connection to the higher being, there's a good future waiting for us. We have a word that is much greater than 400. We have the word of the Almighty that this is a land that's given to the Jews. Of course, it's given to us when we follow the word of the Creator. Right? This is not given to us as, Eretz Yisrael is not a Yerusha, not an inheritance. Right? You say it often, right? A Yerusha, you could blow, right? You go ahead, you inherit $2 million, you can go to Vegas. Right? When it is a morasha, on the other hand, right? It's not an inheritance, but it's a heritage that we have a responsibility with. It's given to us, to live there based on Torah mitzvahs. We live in Eretz Yisrael with the values of Torah mitzvahs, we could feel security. And that's what we are supposed to learn from the Parsha, and therefore we wish a safe trip to Hebron to the many who are going there. They should be inspired to continue living in Eretz Yisrael based on Torah Yisrael. Thank you, everyone. I apologize again.
Can I
Yes,
make one announcement?
one announcement.